This is a last-minute additional announcement for the Katie Halper Show. Since this podcast was recorded, I wrote a piece about the issue of Bernie Bros, and it relates to the issue of left POC. So you can find that at Pace, that's pacemagazine.com, and it's called Selective Feminism and the Myth of the Bernie Bro. And I'll be coming out with a part 2 of that piece soon. So just thought you'd be interested in it because it's so related to this episode. Hi, welcome to the Katie Halper Show. This episode is from a live taping we did of the Katie Halper Show at the Brooklyn Commons. We held it on Columbus Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day. We called it an anti-Columbus Day special. And if you want to hear our discussion about Columbus Day and about historical memory, you can do so by becoming a Patreon supporter of the Katie Halper Show, because we've turned that discussion into a bonus episode. Just go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. But the discussion you are about to hear on this episode is about politics, the lessons and takeaways from the primaries, and the experiences of people of color on the left, with our special guests, Wendi Muse, a PhD candidate in history at NYU. Wendi created the hashtag LeftPOC to draw attention to books, articles, films involving people of color well to the left of Democratic Party centrism. Our other guest was Anoa Changa. Anoa is an attorney in the greater Atlanta metropolitan area. Anoa has served as a grassroots digital organizer with Women for Bernie and African Americans for Bernie. She hosts The Way with Anoa, a weekly talk show and podcast. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit, but I think it's related to the question of left POC. Fast forwarding a couple centuries, do you feel like this primary, and I know we're beyond that primary, but I feel like there is a...
Are we?
Well, I'm not, obviously, and neither is Hillary.
So.
What happened? Yeah, what happened, guys? Oh my God. I wanted to keep the Affordable Care Act. He wanted to get rid of it. Cut to Bernie Sanders being like, I'm not going to get rid of it. I worked on the Affordable Care Act. I'm not going to get rid of it. But I feel like there is this new narrative that's maybe been around for a while, but it really was articulated that the leftism is the realm of straight white men and a kind of privileged position. So I just want to know what you think of that. Let's hear from you, Anoa. A bit of a leading question, but as someone who I think identifies as to the left of the DNC, what do you think? Maybe, yeah. She said, pointing to her, what is it? Vote reparations for president. Is this like the same? I mean, is this the same it's always been for you, or do you feel like there was a kind of shift in the conversation?
Well, I think that social media culture in general, which is where a lot of this stuff tends to really be problematic. I think social media...
by the way, drinking game. Every time someone says problematic, take a sip. Okay.
I think that it's an issue, particularly in social media spaces, because social media itself has just become so toxic and difficult and challenging. I mean, if anyone saw what happened during like Gamergate and what was going on in 2008? Yeah, people use social media and stuff like that. And I think maybe the Pew Research Center and a couple other places actually looked at the increase in our use and reliance on social media for political information, discourse, conversations, etc. But I really think what we've seen is this we have these silos of people who have these huge, in some cases huge platforms and ability to misinform massive amounts of other folks by mischaracterizing and defaming the work of others, right? So my family's always like, why are you arguing with people on Twitter? What is wrong with you? I'm like, well, these people then get on MSNBC and speak as if, this mischaracterization is real life, is actually reality. Or they write a piece in Washington Post or Huffington Post or New York Times.
Lenny letter.
They write a Lenny letter.
That's Lena Dunham thing.
Based on their what they interpret that happens on social media as if that is the truth of what is actually reality. Most people in this room have probably heard the term Bernie Bros. I'm actually someone who argues that is not necessarily an inaccurate term. However, that is more representative of just these online spaces and how people interact. Because there are most certainly Hillary bros who act, Peter Gallo, who act so atrociously and attack people and their work and undermine what they're doing. I do have a podcast, I write infrequently, but I don't have the same access. I know, Brandon, I have to send you my pieces to get you finished. But we don't have the same access to space, opportunity, and power, right? Because Twitter, Facebook, this is how news is being created. This is how information and policy is actually being dictated. When people want to know why Katie or Nomiki Coates will say something about Neera Tanden runs the Center for American Progress. She's the one who helps people on a very high level in our society shape policy and pass laws. So when someone like that with that much power in our society is actually not only mischaracterizing work and what people are saying, but claiming that all of us who exist on the left are white men who are living in our parents' basements jacking off, that's really a problem.
Some of us are asexual.
I'm also very proud, 36-year-old black woman who's living in the South, raising black children, dealing with very real issues, and having the erasure, particularly since my, age group, my voting block, is highly coveted by Democrats when they need to win an election, but completely disregarded any other time, right? So it's really problematic for all of us. And Wendy, and we'll get to Wendy right now. Wendy has been someone. Oh, you're problematic, right?
Yeah. Another one.
Wendy is someone who has helped steer the conversation back to a more rational and logical place, and really, highlight how we all have issues in the way we interact and relate and deal with these political spheres and conversations that are happening. But bringing it back, the erasure that happens, because there are people who are I'm not even that left compared to a lot of folks who are organizing, whether in third-party spaces, or with, more communist-leaning organizations, things like that. I'm not even that left, right? And my voice gets erased. So there are so many other people who are working on issues, who are organizing, who are teaching, who are leading, who completely don't exist because everyone's a white Bernie bro.
Right. That's why I identify as a Bernie bro. I do. I reappropriated the term, but yeah.
Even though
Bernie bros up here, yeah. Do you want to, Gabe is a Chicano dude bro, yeah.
I've never erased. I'm no, it's, I've only met the most aggressive people we've ever had at shows even before we aligned with Bernie were dudes for Hillary.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I've met more Hillary bros than Bernie bros.
Yeah, Hill bros. I think maybe we should call them Hillary men, because that's, of course, this thing that Peter Dow, who we can talk about later, and Tom Watson founded. So could be a good. We need to come up with we are losing at the sound, and the sound bites thing. We need like a Frank Luntz on our side. Frank, I know you're watching. There's no sound right now. Luckily, he subscribes to the podcast. Just kidding. Can you talk about your experience with that, and also how that gave birth to a certain hashtag?
Yes. So throughout the primaries, I supported Bernie Sanders, and proudly so, even though I had problems with some of his legislation, which I wrote an article about that just came out this morning.
Oh, cool. Where?
On Progressive Army, for which I'm also a proud writer. But I think that, on a basic level in terms of policy, I saw Bernie Sanders as a potential option. I didn't see Hillary as an option for me to vote for her. And this was a long time coming. It wasn't something that changed all of a sudden with the primaries. It was something that was, if I go back and look at my Facebook posts or like things that I had written in the past, I'd always had issues with neoliberalism and the way that she governed in ways that I thought tokenized people of color and sort of focused only on how much is our vote worth as opposed to how much are we worth as people.
That's not fair. It also incarcerated people of color,
right?
Executed people of color.
Yeah. I've written extensively about my issues with her, but I think on a historical front, what was frustrating about the primaries was that there were so many people who were saying, well, only white people are leftists, right? Being a socialist or being a communist is such a white thing. Like, It's not something that Black people have the ability to do or the privilege to do.
Or the luxury. Right?
It was framed as a privilege argument, which I found really frustrating because I'm sitting here doing extensive research here and abroad about people who are literally like fighting with guns and knives and whatever means necessary to defend their right to be independent countries or to have rights, and they're doing it under the communist flag and doing it alongside comrades who are from other parts of the world who are white, Black, Indigenous, etc. So it was sort of odd to be enmeshed in this history, this very active history that was going on, and then having people saying, well, socialists are only white, and there's no such thing as a Black socialist or a Latino socialist or whatever. After the primaries were over, and it was just a full onslaught on anyone who was left and of color, I said, you know what, this is ridiculous. Let me start tweeting about it. And so for every time that someone like Joyanne Reid, I don't know if I can mention her name.
Yeah, of course.
It's damn near an expletive at this point. But she and others took the opportunity of the general to sort of say, everyone get in line, everyone has to vote for Hillary, and anyone who doesn't is privileged and white and not doing what they're supposed to do. And I said, okay, let me go through history. Let me go through the books that I've read. Let me, for exams and for my research and whatever, and start creating a list of Black people, Hispanics, Indigenous people, Asian Americans, Asians from Asia, right? Arab Americans, et cetera, who had worked on left-leaning campaigns and had been active in left-leaning movements, and not just as members, but also as leaders, right? I think that's the most important thing. So for me, it wasn't so much a question of, hey, we're here and we're visible and it's important to acknowledge that we exist, but also a matter of understanding how much leftists of color have contributed to the understanding of what we see as leftism, right? There are things that happen long before Marx, long before Sanders, long before Lenin, that you see in African indigenous cultures, in the indigenous cultures of the Americas, et cetera, that would be considered, part of a radical tradition. And I think ignoring that does a grave disservice to our understanding of leftism and organizing in general. So that's why I started Left POC, which is something that I was tweeting under as a hashtag, but now has developed into an actual project called the Left Pocket Project, so Left POC project, KET project.
Left POC, KET.
Yeah, so Pocket. The idea is that you can pull up histories of leftists of color as easily as reaching into your pocket, pulling out your smartphone, and you can have access to those histories.
I love it. Like an app. Can we do an app?
Yeah. Well, I'm working on an app, actually. So all these things are coming.
Left POC, well, actually. And well, actually.
Yeah. So a podcast. We already have the Twitter page up and running, but a Facebook page, YouTube, and eventually I also want to do community discussions.
Snapchat.
I don't know about Snapchat, but because I want it permanent, right? I want it for the record.
Yeah. I know. Way to counter erasure, right? Like literally disappears. Yeah.
But one of the things that I think is really important too is, as someone in academia, I noticed that a lot of academics, while they have very good intentions, often there's a disconnect between them and the communities that they're actually researching. And so part of my work, the focus of the work as well, is to focus on New York, for example. What are neighborhoods that have had activism by leftists of color? What have they done for their community? Are they still alive? If so, let's have them come talk. Yeah. If there are academics who work on the Bronx or Brooklyn or other places, instead of having people from the Bronx and Brooklyn to go to NYU or Columbia or CUNY and sit in these sort of stuffy places where everyone talks about, words that no one really uses in their everyday conversations, how can we reach out to communities and learn from them as well, learn from these histories, and have it to be an interactive process? So that's what the project
and really
is
unpack it.
right. But I mean, I don't want to hear anything about praxis. No offense to anyone who's really big on that word, but the average person, and myself included, right? I'm not sitting around talking about praxis every day. I'm talking about tangible things that we're doing and the way that we're doing it and communicating it in that way. So I think that's really important in the project. So.
Yeah. That's what I think one of the great things about history is that it's not just. Obviously, when it's recent history and it's oral history, there's actually a real activism in just recording these histories, right? And just having people speak about them, exposing people to them, and it's also kind of a living archive. Right. But it is really political and activist when it's about Columbus too. Mm-hmm. But this is, I think it's really cool. It's on such an immediate level. Mm-hmm. So yeah, great. Left POC. We're gonna help popularize that. By the way, do people ever assume you're white or just not paying attention to whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I've been called a white bro, even though my avatar on Twitter
Right.
is like of my face. And last time I checked, I don't look like a white guy, but I can
You know
be
what,
wrong.
you're
I
making
don't know.
assumptions, and that's problematic.
Yeah, but
Just kidding, that's mine.
but yeah, I have a picture of myself on my Twitter page, on my Facebook page, etc. So it's kind of hard to assume. But there were, now that we have Black Lives Matter activists who are paid by Russia, apparently.
Right. Oh, I was going to ask you how much you get paid.
Maybe they just, I get paid a lot by Russia.
many
You have
rubles?
no idea. Tons and tons and tons.
Yo, I
Lots
got my
of
Soros money on.
right. It's one way or the other. You're either a Soros bot or paid by Russia, or the Soviet Union, right? Because
Right.
the Soviet Union still exists in
yeah.
some people's minds.
And it's Putin. Putin
right.
is a big communist.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's possible that they just assumed that I was a plant or something,
Right.
and that I was some white person posing as a black person until they actually Googled me and saw I'm a real person of color. But I know that there are others like Brianna Greyjoy or Joy.
Yeah.
So I always mix up her last name. But she's written pretty extensively about this, and she on a regular basis is called assumed to be white, even though her picture is right there.
Most recently.
Most recently,
She
yeah.
was told that she needed to find a black friend. A black
by
woman,
Lisa?
a black woman was told that she herself needed to find black friends to learn about blackness.
Right.
I think she was trying to encourage self-respect. Like, you need to become friends with yourself. No, I'm just kidding. And that was a white woman who
It
told
was
her
a
that,
white
right?
woman who told her, like, you need black friends so that you can learn about blackness and black people and black people issues. And this is a woman, she's a lawyer here in New York.
Yeah.
Oh, Amy.
Bree.
Sorry.
Bree.
No. Oh, the lawyer. Sorry, yeah, Bree's the lawyer.
Who actually works and organizes and writes. She's had several really great pieces in Current Affairs magazine, actually.
And Progressive Army too.
And Progressive Army.
And the week.
And the week, yeah. Several of them, like Bree's awesome. But yeah, and that's the level of erasure that is happening. And again, a lot of folks like, well, it's just social media, it's not real life, whatever. But again, this is where narratives are being constructed. This is where news, this is where information, this is where power is being, divided up and handed out to those who have the ability to influence millions through their platforms. That's what progressive media, independent media, such as, we got Ben Norton in the back, who does a lot of awesome writing and reporting. And
Aaron Matte
from Real
too.
News.
Oh, Aaron, we're talking Wednesday. Awesome. That's great. But what's really cool about Ben, What's really cool that I appreciate about Ben, though, right? Because Ben is that stereotypical white Bernie bro. Air quotes, right? But Ben,
That's why I asked him to bring us alcohol.
Ben is someone who spends his time and his platform and his voice actually lifting up other folks. Ron Cowlick is a friend of colleague of ours. Like, he'll spend time doing that to make sure that the record is corrected. And there are a lot of corrected records.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people though who are like that, who do understand. And yes, only whatever portion of people actually use Twitter or Facebook. But again, when you're looking at the larger platforms, you're looking at major journalists right now, this is where they play. This is where they exist. This is where they shop and swap information. You'll have people running up and folks to streams like, oh yeah, we used your video in our cast, but we're not going to pay you for it, but we use it on our larger platform. There are things that happen all the time. Or you took pictures at this protest that you were at. Hey, we used it on CNN, but we're not paying you for it. So there's so much that's happening in this new economy that in terms of journalism that we're not really thinking and talking about. So when we're fighting on Twitter with folks, it's not just because we have big egos and oh my God, I gotta get that last tweet in. I'm really mad about people who have 280 characters and I don't.
Oh yeah, how do we get those?
But it really is about protecting, the work that so many people are doing and crafting narratives and shaping dialogue. Because there is a lot of great work that is happening all over the country. There are a lot of amazing people who are organizing and building. For over 3 weeks now in St. Louis, people have been protesting and organizing after the Jason Stockley trial. Most people didn't even know that was going on until Jordan Cheriton from TYT was arrested because St. Louis police had been targeting for weeks live streamers, citizen journalists, actual journalists who were paid by local city papers. People were being harassed, maced, pepper sprayed, and attacked by the police, but it wasn't making any news, right? So this is the type of stuff that a lot of us see going on that we try to highlight and amplify through our platforms, and yet and still we have folks worried about the stupid proxy war for an election that happened over a year ago, and I know, or happened almost a year ago. And yes, the country is reeling. We deal with constant, attacks from the idiot in chief on a regular basis. But at the same time, we have an opportunity to really build something powerful and strong moving forward in these spaces. We have an opportunity to really help, leverage our voice to support good work being done by good people all over the place. Whether they're people like Wendy and her colleagues over here who are doing research and helping to lift up the voices of, marginalized communities, organized people abroad, or they're folks like, Gabe. Gabe is funny, Gabe is hilarious, but super smart. And Katie, who are using their platforms to reach and talk to, people who are in spaces that would not otherwise be highlighted by mainstream media. So there's like a bigger issue when we talk about, the story that was recently done about, Facebook and the Russia BS and how we're focusing so much on Russia, and not really looking at the way in which voices are being restricted and actually curtailed or censored by government. Right? It's not simply that Facebook is randomly doing what it's doing. You have folks like Representative Adam Schiff who actually demand that we got to do something about this because it's Russia that's being divisive. Russia didn't create racism, white supremacy in America. That has already existed, right? Russia is not the reason why Black Lives Matter was organizing or activists were organizing in Baltimore. It's actually activists in Baltimore who knew that fake account was a fake account. But nobody pays attention to people who are actually organizing and building on the street. They're so busy focusing on, Slay Queen, what happened, talk to people and do what needs to be done. So, Did
you see, though, Hillary Clinton when she was interviewed by Mary J. Blige?
Yes. When Mary J. Blige sung to her?
Yeah, the Bruce Springsteen song, 41 Shots, yeah. That was actually when you see for me, it's like the times that I'm most sympathetic to Hillary, and I've always said throughout the whole, primary, my whole life, Hillary is subjected to sexism. We don't need to divide those things up and pretend she's not subjected to sexism. She also hijacks feminism and uses it, right? But
we're only here for the boys.
Yes, we're only for the boys, yeah. But it's funny. So when I see, when I was at the RNC, I was like, oh, yes, Hillary. I was almost like, slay, yes, queen, whatever. But I was it's like, obviously it's misogyny, right? They don't hate her for the right reasons. But, not that I hate her, I'm critical of her policy. But it's not like I don't hate her because she's like, I think she sounds good when she's being honest and critical. I just don't like the content.
I wish she had more of those honest moments. Like, I actually did fight through what happened, right?
Oh my gosh, you deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. What happened, of course, is Hillary's book.
I'll only be honest. I only got through half the book because of life and work and stuff.
Yeah.
But seriously, there were moments in reading her book and thinking about my work as a woman and thinking about my work as a mother, there were moments where I really wish those were stories that she's told on the campaign trail that might have appealed to more of us,
right.
Because the thing is, there are a lot of people who held their nose because, yes, girl, I guess I'm with her was a hashtag. A lot of people did show up because they felt that that's what they were supposed to do because Trump was just so bad, right? Not because she was so what we wanted, right? I think back to 2008 when I chose to support Barack Obama. I chose to support Barack Obama because she ran a racist campaign.
Yeah. That's when when I switched, I was like, whatever. I didn't like his Purple America stuff. I was like, come on. But pick a side. No, when I became a supporter, Obama was with the Jeremiah Wright stuff. Mm-hmm. When they totally what's the word? Race baited him and. She's like, well, you choose your family. You don't choose your family, but you choose your pastor. That's when I was like, forget it.
Really, the worst part really was when she did the interview and made the reference to June assassination.
RFK,
to the assassination of Robert Kennedy. And when you have Peggy Noonan, when Peggy Noonan is going off on you about racial stuff, you know But
Happy Cannon was so upset.
I appreciate how difficult it is for people who are in the Democratic Party because the Clinton family, her and Bill, are a mainstay in modern political culture. I mean, they are the most formidable political machine, political family in modern history, possibly even in, political history as a whole, right? So I understand when you look at the time they took to build, because they had to rehabilitate her because people were done.
Joy Reid, for instance, hated her, and now
there was a lot of work that was done and a lot of support that was built in helping people's campaigns and stuff. So that's also part of the reason why I'm not necessarily willing to toss people aside because they supported her necessarily in the primary. If they're willing to do the work right now, we just saw Randall Woodfin win down in Birmingham, Alabama, a progressive younger candidate who had the endorsement of Barbara Galushin, the local DSA, and several other groups. I think maybe DFA as well. But he had been a Hillary supporter, and yet he had all this huge backing from Bernie folks down in Alabama. But because he was willing to do the work, and he was willing to commit to the policies and opportunity that actually, were going to benefit the community, so people were like, okay, you didn't support Bernie in the primary. Okay, well, you're willing to work with us, though. And so when we talk about left POC and what we're willing to do going forward, because a lot of people did ultimately, even if they did vote for Bernie Sanders, whether or not they were willing to come out for him. I think Alicia Garza did it with that Black Lives Matter interview about how she did ultimately vote for Bernie in the primary, even though Black Lives Matter itself did not do any endorsement. I think a lot of people, Angela Davis, I was surprised. Angela Davis even was like, we need to vote for Hillary because
in the primary?
No.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because Trump is so bad,
Right, yeah.
And Angela's someone who supported third-party efforts, communism, she's a communist, and things like that. So when we talk about left POC, we're either used to explain away why the black vote wasn't, or the Latino vote wasn't what it needed to be for Hillary to win, or we're completely discarded as a whole. And in our politics, our experience, and our relation to these spaces within which we're in, so much more complex than that. And we really need to stop looking at these superficial ways of evaluating, candidates and political dynasties and just political dynamics as a whole, and really get down to looking at the people, the issues, and the policies and how we can do better.
So you're saying you're either erased or blamed?
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what's been happening.
Yeah. Should we open up for questions?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's you guys. We want to open up to audience questions. If you have any, and you can come up. Do you mind coming up here? This is Aaron's brother, in case you couldn't tell.
Good guess.
Yeah.
Do you need my mic?
Hi.
Hello. Long-time listener, first-time visitor.
Yeah.
So just a quick comment and then a question. So you were talking about, when are kids ready to hear about genocide? So I'm visiting here from the west coast of Canada, Vancouver, and I recently happened to attend an information session about becoming like a teacher in the British Columbia school system, and one thing they told us is that they're rolling out a whole new curriculum, which is explicitly about First Nations, residential schools, genocide, from kindergarten up. And so all teachers in the BC school system are going to need to get re-educated on how to deliver this material, and also just about the pride of First Nations culture and all that. So, it seems that somewhere in the world people believe that kids can handle the truth.
Yeah.
So I have to think that could be possible here too. Not that we've remotely solved the problem, or
you can also take that out if you want to take that out. So that's it.
My question is this, and so it's not about Columbus. It's about the last topic you were talking about, and Bernie and Hillary and all that. And I guess I have this concern about asking it because I know that there's like a valid thing about like I'm going to ask you to explain something to me from the perspective of people of color, and I know that there's this sort of thing these days about don't make people of color like educate you, white person, about stuff. But I feel like since it's a question and answer session, since you're up on stage, and the questioner, it seems like the most appropriate forum in which I could possibly ask this question. So this is something I don't understand, and I'm an outsider Canadian, although I used to live here for 10 years. This thing about this notion that Bernie was insensitive somehow to the racial optics and to racial discourse, whereas Hillary intuitively, instinctively got how to speak about race. From what I can see, and I'm asking this question like in good faith.
I'm not laughing, actually.
Yeah. But I really want to understand, because from what I can see, I saw Hillary pandering and sort of...
Hispandering, that's another term.
She's my abuela, bro.
By the way, you're looking for new jokes. I read when you said it takes a village, you can say it takes a village to pillage.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, good, yeah. From Honduras to Libya.
So I see Hillary sort of pandering and focus grouping her way to whatever new woke terms are going to attract the Broad City crowd.
Right.
You know, props to them as comedians and artists, but you know what I'm saying. And then Bernie sort of talking about inequality, and not using modern sort of newfangled lingo, but talking about things in a way that strikes me as pretty right on in terms of an analysis of where inequality and power lies. So actually, I'd like to understand from the point of view of those who are dissatisfied, if you can get into this mindset, from the point of view of those who are in good faith legitimately dissatisfied with Sanders' rhetoric on race, what is that disconnect? And where would he or progressives need to actually step up their game? Because it's clearly an important thing.
Yeah.
So that's the question.
Thank you.
Just thinking about it from a comparative history sort of perspective, one of the things that's interesting about the United States is that we tend to think of a lot of things through the lens of race, right? And that's been pretty intentional in a lot of ways. We don't talk a lot about class. When you go to Latin America and Africa, even, for example, if you look at race-based struggles that are race-based, they always have a class component in ways that's very explicit that you don't see in the United States. So like, for example, in Brazil, which is one of my main focal points of my research, people who are protesting on behalf of black women, for example, there was a recent day of Afro-Latina women, right? And part of their Facebook advertising, they talked about poverty. They talked about addressing the mayor in São Paulo's abuse towards people who were crack addicted. They talked about homelessness, right? They talked about austerity. So you see these very explicit ties between race, gender, class. So identity and class are not disconnected in the same way that they're very intentionally often disconnected in the United States. In the Latin American case, though, we will sometimes see cases where you don't talk about race, you just talk about class, but usually people try to sneak it in some way or another, at least especially in recent years. So I think one of the things that was challenging for Bernie Sanders is that he often didn't make those connections. So you can talk about free college all day long, you can talk about healthcare, and all those things are things that benefit people of color disproportionately because we also happen to be disproportionately poor. But at the same time, if you don't address the sort of markers, the things that people are listening for, then you alienate them. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. It's sort of a PR thing. Yeah. Whereas Hillary, unfortunately, I mean, for better or worse, she had a lot of black women and black people in general who were supporting her, working on her staff. And Anoa can talk a little bit more about this on the underground political campaign side. But just as an outside observer, I felt like she hit all the marks. She hit sort of the buzzwords and the buzz ideas in ways that Bernie did not. He never made those explicit connections, despite a lot of people saying he should. And unfortunately, you can't just say Black Lives Matter and then free college, and not connect the two and talk about where these things overlap. So I think that's where there was a lot lost in his campaign.
Well, I think a primary example of kind of where the disconnect was, and this was an amazing moment. I helped do stuff with African Americans for Bernie, and when Bernie Sanders and his campaign team, I later became friends with his head of African American Outreach, Marty Farrow, and his deputy director of African American Outreach, basically with the whole team, right? So I later got to know a lot of those guys and women, awesome people. But when he went in October, I think it was October or November, ahead of the primary, he went to Baltimore, he went to Freddie Gray's neighborhood, right? And Bernie does a tour of the community, he learns about food deserts, and he's really making those connections. And it was a really great series of conversations he had with local leaders and pastors and things like that. And then he left. And then the campaign didn't come back until 4 weeks before the election, right? So there were these moments where he had these really great connections. I mean, he was the only one that actually showed, well, I won't say the only one, Martin O'Malley was there as well. So he was the only,
old blue eyes.
They showed up to a conversation that happened in Iowa, that a community organization group in Iowa actually organized that dealt with a whole host of issues, including economics, criminal justice, education. They had activists from all over the country come. It was a great, diverse grouping of people. but it was only live streamed. It wasn't something that was ever picked up in mainstream media. And it wasn't really something that his campaign really ran with to help embed in it. So Bernie actually did a lot of things that were right. He showed up for a lot of the right people, but it never got connected into the actual fabric of the campaign itself and built in, right? And so, you know, some people will say that, well, they never really thought they would make it that far, they never really thought this or that, and they were just trying to make sure they hit the major issues, which is fine. But when you look at the organizing side of it and really engaging people, because again, going back to my comment about the Clintons and their formidable political machine, they had already been helping and supporting candidates and campaigns, particularly in the South, right? Because those were the first primaries. When you look at South Carolina, when you look at, you know, folks who are running for office or thinking about running for office or who had got their start, they worked for one of the two Clintons in some way, right? They had donations or sponsorships and support. I mean, part of the reason why people trash Nina Turner the way they do is because the Clintons allegedly showed up for her in 2014 or whatever, right? I mean, there's actually, love Nina very dearly, consider her a mentor. There's actually a whole other story about how the Democrats actually did her and Tara Moses Samuels dirty in Ohio. That's completely different. But oh yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later.
Nina Turner, just so everyone knows, is with the state
president. She was a state senator of Ohio. She ran for lieutenant governor. And one of the things that's always held over her head is the fact that Bill and Hillary, you know, tried to amplify her help when she was running for office. And but
she switched from supporting the Clintons to supporting
she was a part of
Bernie.
For Hillary. She was a part of the Ohio Democratic Party, and so I helped do an organizing training back in July for a group of Ohio organizers, and Nina Turner and Tara did come. Tara's a city councilwoman for the city of Akron, and they did come and they did like a later training for people who were running for office. And they told a story basically about some of the issues that they ran up against, the two of them as friends, as colleagues, as people running for office with the local Ohio Democratic Party, with the unions, with different things. So it's not, you know, it's not simply just the fact that, oh my God, she was no longer ready for Hillary anymore and she decided to endorse Bernie. Like they actually, the story she tells us, they actually begged her not to endorse in the primary, just to be silent. And she has been rewarded with her, you know, brash, bold endorsement of Senator Sanders with a huge outpouring of I mean, I guess she got offered chocolate donuts and water when she tried to deliver a petition to the DNC. But she has been trashed and slashed all over the place in so many spaces. But I say that to say that Bernie Sanders actually did hit on so many, like I supported him, like I supported Bernie Sanders because my dad, right? My dad is from Brooklyn. My dad's a Brooklyn boy too. My dad grew up in Kiwanis Projects. And he had been listening to Bernie back on Air America days. I mean, he'd been C-SPAN, all that. And my dad, you know, made a comment to me, and that's how I first started getting involved in stuff politically. My kids were getting older, so I'm like, okay, I have time to do some stuff. But it was frustrating. I mean, even he had this great Brandon who works with us as well with Progressive Art. Brandon's like, why are you talking to me? But we would try to connect with the campaigns, like, okay, there's this really great piece about education that he talked about. This should be something that becomes more about what you're talking about. This would actually resonate with people and parents all over the place. They didn't really talk about education in terms of K through 12 and the issue of, you know, racial issues in terms of property tax and so many things that actually affect our communities until they got to Chicago. You know, and they did that really great spot with Troy LaRivere, who's potentially running for mayor now. But there were pieces that were missing, and part of it is because of who he had running his campaign. Let's just be real. Jeff Weaver was not the most, you know, multicultural, racially-minded person. I mean,
he's really into comic books, though.
You know, I didn't even know. I thought my dad was joking when he said he
like runs a comic book store.
He runs a comic store in DC. I had no clue. But like, even when you looked at when you looked at who was coming together, right? Like, I remember trying to get friends in different primary, you know, states to vote for him. And I really had the hardest time getting people to agree to do it, only because they didn't think that he could win. Because it's Hillary Clinton, the Clintons, again, it's a name brand, it's already fixed, the system doesn't matter, it's rigged, blah, blah, blah. So
he won twice. No, yeah, Bill won twice, right?
Right.
For
So
president,
I think for a lot of us, even when we look at the fact, I mean, just think back to when Barack Obama was running in 2007, 2008. Yes, he ultimately did have like overwhelming support, from black voters, but initially he really didn't, because no one thought that America would elect a black man, right? Or when you have Andrew Young and other old guard civil rights leaders, he doesn't have the connection to the civil rights movement. He doesn't have the support and stuff like that. So there is a feeling amongst average, everyday working people that certain ideas are not going to be supported. So why should I even be bothered with this primary process that you're talking about? Particularly when you're in a community where it's going to be a long line, like we saw in Nevada. I mean, here in New York, there are people that are removed from the rolls and other ridiculousness that happen. I mean, right now in Georgia, we have people who have been improperly removed from the rolls based on something that's actually a violation of federal law. So we have all these issues going on all over the place. And these are things that have been going on, not just since 2013 with the gutting of the VRA, but they've been going on before even that. So a lot of people just shrug like, that sounds great. But I did try to vote for Jesse Jackson once upon a time, and we see how that turned out.
Right.
So like, to your question, Bernie's not awful, but one thing that really did actually do him really badly was when he answered the question at the Black and Brown or the Brown and Black Forum.
Yes.
It was like about reparations.
Yeah.
And he and Hillary basically had the same answer, except she knew how to finesse it, right? And she also
didn't answer the question.
She knew how to finesse it, but she also knew to mention John Conyers' reparations study bill, and that automatically got people thinking. Whereas Bernie was just like, no, blah, 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 And the problem is that same roughness, same rugged grandpa-ness some of us love about him is also what turns some people off as, a disingenuity or a lack of concern for the condition of folks. So, I mean, I
don't even think it's disingenuous. I think it's the opposite. It's like a gruffness, like you said.
But I think people will take it that way. But having a gruff granddaddy from Brooklyn, having a dad from Brooklyn who's just like real, like straight to the point, like whatever. Like, so it didn't bother me, but I know for a lot of people, it was just like, no. And it was really easy to say Bernie's a racist because he might have misspoke.
About the ghetto gas or whatever, which we can talk about, which was in the style.
He might have said it. And again, this comes back to the earlier point about social media and the way people have controlled narratives, right? Because one little thing would happen and it would get taken, and all of a sudden you see 50 headlines. I'm exaggerating, but you see a whole bunch of headlines about something that was taken out. Even his post-election commentary about identity politics.
Total lie.
It's one line that is taken out of context and they ignore the other two paragraphs of what he actually had to say. So
the same thing with Killer Mike.
They do. Yeah. Oh, so that's a funny story. So I actually did an interview with Joy Ann Reid before she went on MSNBC about the uterus moment. So if you're not familiar, Killer Mike introduced Bernie Sanders when they were in Atlanta. Yeah, Killer Mike is a rapper. He's an organizer. He's an activist. Some people. I just heard an interview with Big Boy from Outkast joking about how he needs to run for governor. But what was really fascinating was, he was introducing Bernie Sanders in Atlanta at Morehouse, ahead of the primary. And a part of his introduction, this is somebody who's a straight shooter. He don't pull no punches when he speaks. He quotes
Jane Elliott.
He quotes Jane Elliott, basically saying something about
who's an educator who wrote Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes. She did studies about bias and the way
So he's quoting her basically in a statement, and he explains that he's quoting her in this sentence that he said, but it's basically about not voting with her uterus. This is a statement she makes, and he's quoting her, right? And so that sets off all the alarms. Bernie's sexist and
his surrogates are
sexist and blah, blah, blah. Now, should Killer Mike have said what he said? I really don't know. I don't get into all that. But what's really interesting was, though, this was right after the entire gaffe with Madeleine Albright and Gloria Steinem about, they're just supporting Bernie because of the boys, or there's a special place in hell for women who don't support
other women. Yeah.
Cool tidbit, which you all, me and New Yorkers might know, Hillary Clinton did not support Death or Teach Out when she ran against Andrew Cuomo.
Of course, right.
She supported Andrew Cuomo. So,
also,
or Donna Edwards.
Or Donna Edwards.
Or Donna Edwards in 2016 when Hayes Savon dropped a whole bunch of money against Donna Edwards because his only issue is Israel.
Also, really quickly, just Killer Mike didn't say voting with your uterus. He said it's not enough to have a uterus.
Yes, that's what he said.
Which is yeah.
Thank you so much. So what ends up happening is, as representative of African Americans for Bernie, Joy Ann Reid at the time had a serious XFM, radio show or whatever she was doing. Right before she went on MSNBC, she was a lot nicer then.
And her politics were better too.
She was a lot nicer then. But I ended up getting ambushed because I ended up getting asked to defend Killer Mike in that commentary. But I say all that to say that these are narratives that are being construed and used to shape stories in dialogue, and most of us are really busy, so we don't have time to go past the headlines. We might be able to read an article here or there, but we might not have time to sit there and dig and do the research to actually verify. We're trusting sources, right? The Washington Post is a mainstay in American journalism that many of us have been taught that is trustworthy. However, we have seen many examples of where that's not the case.
They had 16 anti-Sanders articles over the course of 16 hours.
Same with New York Times. The New York Times is like the pinnacle of journalism, allegedly. And then we see otherwise, in many instances. But we have right, but we have, now we have the backlash that we've had post-election, and there really is a clamping down on independent media sources because of fake news. And there are those of us present who do, independent media journalism. I say I do political commentary more than journalism, but we do try our best to push back against bad narratives, against false news stories, because it sullies the entire field for all of us. And what has been happening with this political field and this whole Russian blame for everything, nothing was absolutely done wrong, or Bernie destroyed all chances. Bernie has a lot of problems and issues, but that's a politician, right? That's any political campaign. They have problems. Nothing is perfect. Can he improve? I really hope if he's considering 2020, he absolutely.
You guys have you have to talk to him.
Me personally, I hope he helps someone else in 2020. But regardless, I love Nina.
Yeah, by the way, we had Nina on the show. We had Jane Elliott on the show. Killer Mike, not yet. We'd love to. But we also had Nando Villa, who was the guy who asked Sanders about reparations. And what he said was that he was surprised by how kind of unambiguous, unequivocal Sanders was, but he respected him more because he was direct about it, as opposed to Hillary Clinton, who, as he said, tap danced around the question.
All around the answer, but what happens is that because they get packaged.
Yeah.
They've invested, they've built the infrastructure, they've supported people, and so that gets packaged. I mean, however you feel about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, we did learn a whole lot about the way things work on the back end of some of these reporters who have reported and covered political stories and don't disclose, their conflicts. Right now, actually, in our race in Georgia, there is a journalist with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that's actually working for one of the Georgia candidates who has not disclosed that in any of his reporting about the race itself.
Khalid Kamau, who's a city councilman
in the city of South Fulton
in Georgia.
Just south of Atlanta.
He actually said something interesting about we also interviewed him, and he said that he, as a black man, gets to not kind of make those connections explicitly, and people get it. And how for someone like Sanders, someone who's white, there is this extra thing that they need to do. His response was like, we need to run more people of color, which is true, but we also need to, I think, there needs to be teachable moments about how people who are not of color can speak in a more.
My mayor, Steve Reed, who did one of the infamous Correct the Record hit pieces. I mean, he's a prime example of someone who, all skin folk and kinfolk, right? Like he's a good example of that.
Right. Also, this is really funny. Khalid Kamau, remember when we interviewed him, he was talking about one of Bernie's failures was, like, for example, on an optics level, was that America video he did, the Simon and Garfunkel song, but which was all white all the time, and they released a campaign video that was to that song, and it was white, but wasn't it also in Iowa?
It was in Iowa, but the problem was they rebranded in the South.
That's what it was. Yeah. Okay. That's a faux pas.
They didn't take the time wanted to do a new promotion.
But Khalid
It should have been Outcast.
Yeah.
I mean, really though, if you want to win this,
yeah.
you use some Big Crit, you use some Outkast.
And then Simon and Garfunkel as a rapper. But he said, he's like, you know, whatever, they did that song by Neil Diamond. It was really funny. And we were like, Simon and Garfunkel, yeah. He's like, I don't know, some white singer. It was funny. Anyway. And do we have more? Do you want to respond to that, or do you want to?
No, I mean, since I already talked about it, but one quick thing is that I think it's hard, though, for a lot of black candidates or candidates of color in general to make the economic connections, because I think they are automatically expected to also talk a lot about race. Again, it's a byproduct of the American history, right? But I think and also it's kind of dangerous. I mean, if you look at the history of leftist people of color that I study, a lot of the time when they start talking about breaking down these economic powers, they get killed, or they are infiltrated, or their groups are separated or broken up, destroyed. So I think that there's a real lesson from the state that says don't do this, and I think that's why a lot of people approach it with extreme caution if they broach the subject at all. So it's a tricky spot to be in, I think, in ways that I think white candidates can broach both subjects without quite the same risk.
They have the privilege, maybe.
I mean, I think that they're not taken as much of a threat because they know the assumption is that they won't garner as many people of color in the first place.
Or they're not violent. I mean, I think there's this assumption that there's not a violent, you know, that the lack of danger or whatever.
Exactly.
Any more questions? And then thanks. And then then we'll be chilling and drinking, and people can come up.
I think this might be the last question.
Lucky you. Then we'll
Nice to hear you all. So I'm recently a transplant to New York from Charlottesville, and we kind of dealt with the statue issue head on. I guess my comment and question is about that. So we had one obvious foe, which was the right wing, the neo-Nazis, but they were really small in numbers. Our biggest foe in terms of numbers and numerically were the either liberals or progressives, if you want to call them, who in our government actually voted to keep the statues and actually made an effort to run candidates against people who wanted to get rid of the statues.
I know that.
This guy, Michael Signer, who is the mayor of Charlottesville currently, he's really connected with the sort of state government in Virginia, both the senators and the governor. So, I mean, what do you do when your foes are too? I mean, there often are in all these issues. So what is your strategy for targeting sort of the moderates or the center or whatever when they're opposing in these battles?
By the way, Kader Yatim, who we had last live show, who is one of my top 5 favorite Lutheran pastor Palestinian socialists, who he lost, but he came close to he did very well at city council. He actually opposed, he started highlighting, I didn't even know we had a General Lee monument here, somewhere here, and
on a military base close
by. Was that
by.
what it was?
Yeah.
Do you want to, thank you.
I mean, this is a hard question to answer, right? Again, I'm not a political strategist, so I don't know how quite to reach moderates to break down their biases about statues.
We're not friends with any. Just kidding.
I'm friends with a lot, but I feel like,
good for you.
I mean, my whole family, right, is sort of, they're Democratic voters. I think one of the things, though, that you can do is just propose an alternative, right? I think a lot of the time there's this belief that, like, you want to destroy something, but you don't have anything to replace it, or you don't have anything to sort of, not just to replace it, but you don't have any sort of content to fill the space. And that just tearing it down is a pointless venture, and it's not worth, it doesn't do anything in terms of the culture or the community. I think in some ways, if there's a way to counter with what monuments you could propose or what projects you would propose, positive things that would exist in its place that both moderates and like progressives and leftists would appeal to all groups. Sure. I mean, I don't know a ton about North Carolina history, but I'm sure there are people there that all of these groups would sort of get behind and say, this is a person that we should, whose message we can advance or whose background we should promote. But in terms of, I mean, like I said, I'm sort of, on the one hand, I'm really in support of taking down the statues, But at the same time, I think there are things that can be done simultaneously that are just as powerful, if not more so, for the lasting legacy of what it means to go against the people that the statues represent, right? And I think in that sense, a lot of moderates would get behind it. I don't think, I mean, even people who are run-of-the-mill Democrats are not like in favor of the federal, right? At least to the best of my knowledge. I don't think anyone
openly.
Right, right, openly, not to our knowledge in the present. But yeah, I think that would be one way, perhaps, to sort of bridge those gaps. In terms of legislating on it, though, I would not have any idea what to do in that case.
I think you should have a museum and say what they were apparently put up for, and then what the truth is about. That would be a great museum. Put them all together, under one roof.
Correcting the record.
Correcting the record.
Yeah. When I was in Spain, I remember saying to someone whose father had worked on this monument, because I made a documentary on it, I screened it, and he came up to me, because I was saying I think it should remain and it needs to be turned into a museum, because it's this huge edifice, whatever. And he was like, no, it shouldn't be. Afterwards, he came up to me and I said, well, isn't it, what about like with the concentration camps where they are used as these teachable didactic tools? And he said something, I was like, oh my God, kind of crystallized a lot. He was like, well, the difference is that Hitler didn't want people to see them. So having a concentration camp as a tourist, as an educational destination and a tourist destination is in itself like, subversive, because you're taking something that they did not intend to be a monument and you're turning it into a monument of significance, right? Whereas with these, there's more work to be done because they were monuments, they are monuments. So you have to kind of in other words, with the concentration camp, you just turn that into a monument to what shouldn't be, and that's it. You don't need to do more. I mean, it's a complicated thing, but it's more work when it's actually intended to be a tourist destination or, Anyway, did you want to last words? Or?
Yeah, I think that what's really interesting is that we look at these issues and we forget about, that there are all these other issues that are really actually directly impacting the communities that we say we want to represent and support. And the statues are definitely a standpoint. I'm pretty sure that those people who were running, against or about taking down statues probably had other really powerful things in their platforms and processes as well. I think what we really need to start doing politically better is finding ways to build space and community with actual community organizers and organizations and folks who, nearly half of the country didn't vote, right, last election cycle. And so many more do not participate in actual local elections. When they had the election, I'll refer to Birmingham because that's numbers I know off the top of my head that just happened. They had less than 30% turnout in the city for a mayoral election. And so, it's what Bernie always says, right? When we have high turnout, we win, progressives win, and when low turnout, we lose. And I think that if we start building more of the support, whether we were talking about Spain earlier, they've had Rebel Cities movement that has happened. That's similar to the People's Assembly process that was used in Jackson, Mississippi, with the Jackson Kush plan in an election of Chokwe Antar Nduga, who succeeded, he didn't directly succeed, but his father had been elected mayor several years ago as well. There are these processes to build that community capacity and help people become more engaged and invigorated in a process that is relational and not transactional, and that we're not simply being extractive and expecting organizers and communities to do all the heavy labor on top of the work they already do. That we're finding a way to help build, value in the process that has let so many people down for so long. So I say that to say that it's not going to be a simple, easy thing. The establishment is going to keep running candidates against, progressives, against radicals, because at the end of the day, they all have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, right? Even with something that should be a no-brainer, like taking down Confederate monuments. The Confederacy were traitors. Why do we have statues to traitorous individuals? What was really interesting was when there was an article a couple months ago when Charlottesville happened that the statues actually are identical in North and South, but they're just branded differently because there was a company at one point in time that just mass produced all these statues. And the statues in the South and the North, they actually look the same. Just some might have Confederate emblems and others might have Union emblems.
That is the most American industrious thing I've ever heard.
But
It's a win-win.
It is, but we also have already seen how people will spend more time building and trying to get that elusive moderate Republican vote.
Yeah.
When in fact they're often losing trying to do that. I mean, that's what happened in the Georgia 6th race just 5 minutes north of where I live. They also campaigns spent more time trying to get moderate Republicans, the so-called suburban, people who want to do better, who don't like Trump. I mean, and they lost. They actually left on the table approximately 30,000 to 40,000 votes in communities of color that I think he lost by maybe about like 10,000 votes. They actually didn't knock on 30,000 doors or something basically about that, right? So there is a way, and one of the things I do credit to this entire Bernie mania phase, so to speak, is that the rise of grassroots organizing in political sphere that we have seen, people willing to step up with sometimes only enough to run off a couple of copies, for their local area, willing to step up and do what needs to be done for organizations as we see groups like DSA coming online. If you do know candidates, if anyone does know candidates who are running in, looking for endorsements, I know a bunch of folks who work with Democracy for America, you have Democratic Socialists of America, you have Our Revolution. You do have these different organizations that are coming along, but I think what's really important is that candidates, it's not enough that you've gone and knocked on doors in certain neighborhoods. You have to actually build with the people in those neighborhoods so they have the buy-in of the candidate that is running, that they have some commitment. And really, I'd love for us to start doing more of the Rebel Cities People's Assembly type model to start getting that input and value when we're raising people up. Because if you're only having 20-30% turnout, and we can actually get our communities to really show up and vote, that's when we start turning things around, whether we have the money or the resources or not. So.
Well, thank you so much. Anoa Changa, you're Anoa Changa on Twitter?
No, I'm
the Way with Anoa for podcast. The Way with Anoa on Twitter. Gabe_Pacheco. Letter K, letter T, H-A, so stupid. Letter K, letter T, H-A-L-P-S, KT Helps on Twitter, and Wendi Muse with an I, right? W-E?
Muse Wendy.
Muse Wendy.
Because I opened Muse Wendy, or Wendi Muse, and then I forgot my password, and now it's an egg.
It's
Muse
a Russian
Wendy.
bot,
Yeah.
like you really are. Muse Wendy spelled with an I, so
Correct.
Muse, W-E-N-D-I.
And Left POC.
And Left POC hashtag and the Twitter account.
Yes.
Thanks you guys so much, and use hashtag KT Help Show, and we will see you at our next live taping. And by the way, Gabe has a weekly comedy show called Funhouse Comedy, Wednesdays at Pete's Candy Store.
It's always free. It's at 10 p.m. Come by.
Yeah.
They have grilled cheese sandwiches.
It's in Williamsburg, in Greenpoint, Williamsburg.
It's in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, at Pete's Candy Store.
Yeah. And subscribe to the Katie Halper Show on iTunes. Rate and review us, and on SoundCloud. And yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to the Katie Halper Show. To access our bonus episode, which I think will definitely want to hear, and I think this discussion with Anoa and Wendy will have convinced you of how great they are to listen to and how much you're going to learn from them, please go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. The Katie Halper Show is produced by Florence Burrow Adams with help from Joshua Bregman. Our theme song is by The Ballet. You can follow me on Twitter at KTHelps. That's the letter K, the letter T, H-A-L-P-S, and Gabe at Gabe_Pacheco. Use the hashtag KTHelpShow. That's letter K, letter T, H-A-L-P-S-H-O-W. If you want to reach out to us or tweet about us, rate and review us on iTunes. Like our Facebook page, which is just The Katie Halper Show. Thanks so much for listening to The Katie Halper Show.